Hey guys, this is Annie with Saltown Realty. Today on our third Thursday show, we have a very exciting guest. Cole Parkinson is a appraiser in town. Every once in a while, I run into an appraiser, and I'm going to be honest, usually they're not super friendly. After the whole 2008 thing, realtors and appraisers, even though we kind of work in conjunction, we really don't interact that much, and we don't really maybe even know that much about each other, and it's always like a little weird. So this is Cole Parkinson. He is an appraiser that I met while on a job. Every once in a while, I run into an appraiser, and I'm going to be honest, usually they're not super friendly. After the whole 2008 thing, realtors and appraisers, even though we kind of work in conjunction, we really don't interact that much, and we don't really maybe even know that much about each other, and it's always like a little weird. And Cole is like the friendliest appraiser I've ever met, and gave me his business card and let me know if I had any questions that I could ask. So I was like, okay, I do have a question. Will you be on my show?
Yeah,
So thanks so much for being here.
yeah, absolutely happy to be here. I get that kind of tiff between realtors and appraisers. I don't know why it is. I've been in the business for a while, and for the most part, every experience I've had with realtors has been pretty pleasant. So it must be on our end as appraiser. So trying to change
I
that.
think it's because you're pleasant.
All right, that's it.
Nothing against the other appraisers, but yeah, like I said, usually it's a little bit like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, I just brought you comps,
Yeah,
hoping that I could help. So,
perfect. I've received donuts before, so donuts definitely help as well. Yeah,
wow. Okay, maybe I
filter
should have
went out of the way.
included in my questions, what should I do as a
Yeah,
realtor to talk to appraisers? So yeah, I wanted to just start out with in real estate, there's so many different facets.
mhm,
I think people just think buying houses, they think realtors, but there's appraisers and underwriters and lenders and so many, and title people and all these different things.
yeah.
How do you get into that business?
Yeah, so personally, it started with me with my dad. He's been an appraiser here in Utah since I was born. Basically, that was his job when he and my mom got married. And funny thing, I mentioned this to you, but when my mom was working and they couldn't find a sitter or someone, my dad would take me with him to inspections and sit me in the middle of the room and say, "Don't touch anything," as he walked out and did his inspections and took pictures and stuff. So I've been technically on an appraiser as an appraiser's assistant, what you call it, since 1999 basically. But yeah, my dad's been doing it, and in college I picked it up, or I started training with him kind of as a side gig to what I was doing with classes and everything. And then there are some classes you have to take through the state of Utah. You have to have a bachelor's degree and have to be certified and have to have a certain amount of hours. Yep, you have to have quite a bit of education and experience hours and a couple of certification tests. So they've definitely lowered the barrier to entry from when the only point of reference I have is my dad, from when my dad joined. But there's still, some hoops you have to go through to become an appraiser. But yeah, that's kind of my background. I don't know if that answers your questions.
No, it totally does. It makes me curious about your dad. Like, did he have, was he in any other realms of real estate, or was he just an appraiser?
He was just an appraiser. He majored in finance, and that's kind of, back when he graduated, that was just kind of the route he decided to go, and saw a flyer for appraisers needed and took the job. So this was, I want to say, the 1990 when he started, and
Yeah.
here I am. So kind
Yeah,
of
and
a,
then it turned into the family business.
yeah.
Who knew? And what's your degree in?
My degree is in marketing.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
and I don't know anything with marketing. I mean, I guess this could be marketing for myself, right? But
Yeah.
whatsoever, it's basically finance driven, yeah, and statistics, I guess.
Okay. So I want to know how you define appraisals. Like, I obviously have my own version of explaining the appraisal process to prospective buyers
Mhm.
and sellers. So what would you say an appraisal is?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it, in my point of view, and definition wise, it is an opinion of value. As appraisers, we look at the home we're appraising, right? We call it the subject home. look at its makeup, its size, its condition, bedroom count, where it's located. Compare that, the subject, to, 3 to 6 to 7 other homes in the area that have sold recently of similar size, condition, those things that I mentioned, and then make adjustments depending on how similar they are. If, bigger, there's adjustments, smaller, there's adjustments, condition-wise. And then those adjustments give us what are called adjusted sales prices. And we have a range from the lowest range, the highest range of those comparable homes. Now, personally, as an appraiser, I kind of pick the middle ground of that low and high as my opinion of value, as my appraised value. But based on the home, if it's in really good condition, it can be towards the higher end of that range that I've discussed. Or if it's, needs some updates, or it's got some wear and tear, we call it deferred maintenance, it can be towards the lower end of that range. So it's, in layman's terms, an opinion of value. It's not really a science, if I can say.
Well, I do always say it's a human endeavor.
Yes, that's the way of putting it.
So I should have warned you. I knew that on this interview I would be like ding 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 with like different questions. So I have 2 questions from what you just said. The first one is, whose opinion of value? Is it truly your opinion, or is it the bank's opinion or the lender's opinion? Like whose value is it?
Yeah, so there's kind of 2 answers.
Yeah.
And I'll start off with, it's my signature that goes on the appraisal. So it is technically my opinion of value. Me, Cole Parkinson, signs at the bottom of the appraisal. This is my opinion of value. However, the value is driven by data, historical data, comparable homes to the subject we're talking about, the appraised property, that have sold, as close to the current date as possible, right? So it's my opinion of value, but it's also driven by that historical data that has been, I guess, also driven by the market. And when we say market, I think of an open market in a foreign country. You go and got a chicken hanging, and you're like, how much would you pay for this chicken? What would those people in that market pay for that chicken?
Right.
Consider your subject home as the chicken in this open market. What would 20, 30, 40 people pay for your home? That value is driven by similar sales in the area, also purchased by those same people looking at it. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I
it
try
does.
to break it down like that in my mind. That's how it works.
No, I love the chicken analogy. I might use that in the future, actually, in terms of just market conditions.
Yeah.
Because a chicken is going to have a different value in different places, and it depends on how many chickens have. Maybe there's been a swine flu that's gone around.
Yeah.
Or,
a shortage, right? Yeah. Or an excess of chicken, right? We're seeing that with eggs right now. Eggs are crazy expensive.
Exactly. Yeah. So when you are, so on our MLS, you know this already.
Yeah.
We have all of my clients that might be on here have seen me do this before. I pull up all the homes. I use a really small, I think I use generally a smaller location than you guys do. You guys do 1 or 2 mile radius typically, right?
Yeah. The compliance, United States compliance appraisal people like us to stay within a mile. So I personally try to stay within a mile, but for certain instances, you might have to go outside of a mile. But it's a mile, really. Right.
So when I'm comping a house, I put in a very small radius. I pull houses in a similar, geographical area, similar price range, similar square footage, etc. And then on our MLS on Utah Real Estate, they have a little program that just assigns different number amounts to, beds, baths, square footage, acreage, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And it pops out a number. And I always say, let's take this number with a grain of salt because, it's going to be the chicken thing. It's going to be a market thing. And it's also going to be, how much do you like the house and how much do you want to pay for the house?
Totally.
So, and then I also say, I know that appraisers have their own program that's different than our program. Mm-hmm. And believe me, I wish we had the same darn program that we could use. And I say, and their program has kind of different numbers assigned to each thing because I've had obviously high and low appraisals. Mm-hmm. So when you are doing it, you're typing in all your information, and do you typically just kind of trust that middle marker on the computer program, or do you put in a little bit of your own knowledge of that area? I guess I'm trying to decide how much of it is really your understanding of the market and how much of it is just kind of the computer program.
Yeah.
And I'm all appraisers are different. I'm sure some guys just go and, you know, type it in and just spit out a number, and maybe some people are kind of a little more thoughtful about it.
No, definitely. I like to definitely put more of my opinion on it. I've actually had this question before, so it's interesting that more people are thinking of it this way. I would say it's 75-25 for the appraiser's experience and opinion, in my opinion. So I do use my program. I know it has auto-populating adjustments for square footage, things like that.
Right.
And I can tweak with those as well, you know, depending on the neighborhood or the zip code or the market area. But I think a lot goes into the appraiser's knowledge of a market area. And that's what we do. That's why we take classes. That's why we have continuing education courses. That's why we, and that's why we get paid what we get paid, because it's not just technology, you know, statistics. It's kind of putting pieces of a puzzle together and seeing what the picture is at the end, as opposed to just ones and zeros, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think just like realtors, you know, people put more or less of themselves into their job or care more or less about it. So I'm sure if you're really engaged in doing your CE classes and, you know, interested in doing the right thing, I guess you're going to be putting kind of a little bit more of yourself potentially. And that was, just to be clear, that was 75% the computer and 25% yourself? Or
no, 75% myself.
Cool. Okay.
I mean, and maybe that's giving myself too much credit. Yeah, you know, I don't know, but that's how I would do it. I do like to take good care and make sure I'm doing my job. And if something's funky with my program, I'll override it, right, or tweak that so that it's more accurate.
Yeah. No, I love that. And for the record, the appraisal that Cole did for me was a great appraisal.
Good to hear. I was going to ask, yeah.
So that's helpful as well. So how often does your job change with the market? So like for me as a realtor, I swear to you that every week I'm kind of like tweaking and adjusting and recalibrating of like, how much house do you get for this price range? You know, like in these different little areas. And I work in a pretty small area generally. I typically consider myself a belt loop real estate agent, where I'm like in that 215. So how often are you, you know, kind of noticing those changes happening? And are you getting that information from kind of a boss, or are you just noticing it, or is it from your CE? Like, how do you adjust to the market? Because I'm like with human people every single day. It's like, I can't not adjust. So how does an appraiser adjust? Yeah,
that's a good question. So with each appraisal report we do, with each specific property, we do run a market market data analysis. So with each appraisal, with each home in that specific market area, and we can define the parameters for that, where we're analyzing the market, how the market has looked in that area for the past, 4 quarters, basically 12 months.
Yeah.
And so with each appraisal, we are making market adjustments depending on, what the market in that area looked like a month ago or 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago. And like I mentioned earlier, it's very historically data driven from the past, right? We do a lot of looking, we react to the market as opposed to predict what the market's going to do.
Right.
And that's based off of what's happened in the past really 6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
So your question, long story short, it's with every appraisal, we're looking at that market condition.
Yeah. So much data driven stuff. Whereas I feel like while I definitely am analyzing data on a weekly basis, because I'm full-time and I'm constantly out there, a lot of times I'll have this idea in my head about what's going on, and then I have Corinne, my assistant, like pull the data, because I know that if I pull the data, I'm going to pull it in the way that I'm thinking. Yeah. And often those numbers are actually the same just because I'm in it day to day. So the data doesn't lie. But, when the market was crazy hot, 2020, 2021, I mean, it was evident that things were changing just on a weekly basis, and that appraisers were working in that past data, because the past, even a month prior, could have been totally different. So we'd always have to be telling people, like, they're working on data. They are only looking at past sales, not what's currently happening. What's currently happening will become the past for next week's offer or whatever it is.
In
Um,
those years, we were doing our best to try to keep up, right? Prices were increasing so much that even a week ago, a sales price was different on a home than what it was today.
yeah.
And now here, I mean, I'm doing a very similar thing now where home prices are kind of flatlining a little bit and going down a little bit. Lots of concessions you probably see in homes, and again, trying to catch up to what's going on and represent that accurately. So there are adjustments being made, like you've seen, but it's hard staying relevant with what's going on right now when we use historical data.
Totally. Yeah, and so that brings me to a question that is not on my list for you, which is, what are you seeing with appraisals right now? Are you having more low appraisals? Are you staying kind of, at value with whatever offer somebody put in? What are you generally seeing right now?
Yeah, good question. And there's a lot going through my mind wanting to answer that. I want to
I
answer.
think we're both just going,
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Prices are definitely decreasing. What I can see in the Salt Lake Valley in the last 3 months, I've had more appraised values come in below asking price or purchase price than I had the last year, and that's just because the market hasn't caught up yet, or like those things that I mentioned. But things are definitely plateauing a little bit, not as increasing as much, and declining. So that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens, because from my end, which I feel like realtors are slightly more like maybe a week ahead or something. Like I just put in an offer yesterday that has multiple offers, and I'm like, and that's been happening more and more. So then I'm again recalibrating, adjusting, being like, okay, when I'm putting in offers, now what happens to make sure that my clients are getting those houses, and then also considering the appraisal so much more in this period of time, because I'm like, well, they might have multiple offers, but an appraiser is going to be looking at last week and the week before that, not in the second.
Yeah.
And so we need to be really thoughtful about what we're putting in. So we're like trying to compete, but also competing against a slightly declining market as of like 2 weeks ago. And it's hard to write offers right now to make sure that you get people what they want, but that you're also being realistic.
For sure.
So one of the questions I sent to you is, like, from a bank's perspective, are they more interested, and I think you've kind of already answered this, are they more interested in who's buying the home or market data, things like that, in terms of assessing value of a home?
Yeah, so that, I work for the bank, but I don't work for the bank, in other words.
And that my question. So you can go into that too, like, who do you work for?
Yeah. I don't work for the bank, so I don't have a direct answer for that question.
Okay.
I am a partial third party that the bank hires to do an appraisal.
Yeah.
I get paid if my appraised value is the sales price. I don't get paid if it's higher than the sales price. I don't get paid if it's lower than the sales price. I get paid to do the appraisal.
Okay.
And I'm the middleman that should not have an opinion on it, depending on if I get paid or not, if that makes sense. So to answer your question, I don't quite know if the banks care more about who's buying the home or market conditions. What I do know is the bank uses my appraised value as collateral for their loan. They're making sure that they're not lending out too much money or not too little money, too much money, right? If I give them two values, one is the purchase, or if I come over the purchase price, they're going to pick that lower purchase price, or that lower value. If I come in lower than the purchase price, they're still going to pick that lower value.
Right.
So I couldn't answer your question from the bank standpoint. I know from my standpoint.
So I'm thinking now what could have been fun, and maybe we can do it someday in the future, is to have you and your dad on to get a historical perspective on appraisal. This is kind of off topic, but I'm thinking what were appraisals like in the 80s? What happened during 2008 from his perspective ongoing into now? Does he see your job as in my day, this is how we did it? Some realtor just would hand me $100 bill and I'd appraise it for the value. No, I'm just kidding. But, it'd be interesting to have.
It's funny you mentioned that. He was never bribed like that, but there were, hey, I need this value. And I've learned a lot from my dad. Everything I've learned from my dad in these classes that I've taken. So I give him a lot of credit. Yeah. But there has been a lot of change, and there are definitely more regulations on lenders and banks and things like that. Because back in the day, probably when you're thinking in the early 2000s, 2008 happened, lenders and banks were like, hey, we need this value. And if you don't get that value, you wouldn't get business from them again. So
Right.
that communication has changed drastically, and from what he's told me at least.
Yeah. I think that that's so good for people to know, because I do think, you know, people are leery about realtors. I know that because I am one, and I've like seen the side eye. And I think that people are leery about appraisals too, you know, like not really understanding what goes on, and not really understanding how many changes have occurred since like olden days when that sort of stuff was going with like loan fraud and realtors only using certain banks that made sure that they had their values.
Yep.
Just, you know, for the people in the back, that stuff doesn't happen anymore. Like even
Right.
if I refer a lender to somebody, I always go, just so you know, I don't get anything out of this. Like I don't get paid if you use my lender. It only matters to me because I know that this guy does a really great job. You know, so I think that that's just something that people haven't been super well educated on, and don't know that how many things have changed, you know, in the meantime.
Yeah, definitely.
So I guess as a final question, because I like these things to be less than a half an hour, I feel like I could ask you a question for an hour. But what should consumers know about appraisals aside from what we've talked about? You know, if you're putting an offer in on a home, do you have any like just kind of good tips for buyers and sellers in regards to appraisals? And I mean, you do appraisals for refinances, presumably, and for maybe even like a HELOC or different things. You do appraisals for all sorts of things. I do both buyers and sellers, obviously, but I always kind of just go on the buyer's perspective because I think it's more fun.
No, it definitely is.
Tips.
For buyers, sellers, you know, purchases, refinances, HELOCs, pre-foreclosures, the whole shebang. First of all, don't be afraid of appraisers. We don't work for the bank. Like I said, we're this neutral third party, kind of just the boots on the ground, making sure that the home is there, nothing funky's going on with it, and then we just kind of tell the story of what the home is like, right? And that's what the bank wants to see, is what they're getting themselves into. Now, from a buyer's perspective, maybe a better way of putting it on my side is from a seller's perspective, what adds value or what to look for in a home. First of all, from an appraisal standpoint, just make sure that it's clean when I walk through it, that looks better on my photos and in the report. And I don't necessarily say, you know, it was a mess, don't buy this home. A home shows better when it's clean, and you as a realtor know that. But little updates go a long way in a home. You know, a fresh coat of paint can make something look way more contemporary, and it's not expensive. You know, it's not a really expensive light fixture or a bunch of expensive appliances. Updated flooring goes a long way, and it shows really nicely. So things like that definitely help. The more updates, the better in a home. Just that's what helps with value. And I'd say the biggest thing that helps bring up a home's value is finishing the basement. But by far, finishing the basement.
Okay. Yeah, noted. Actually, along those lines, I have seen appraisals, and I feel a little foolish not really having a strong understanding of this. This is my little added question here. There are some appraisals that only count above ground square footage, so they don't count basement. But in Salt Lake, they count below and above ground square footage, right?
Yeah, so that's an interesting, I've never encountered where we don't count below ground square footage.
Yeah.
Above grade square footage is, we call it gross living area, and it is worth more. We value it greater over basement square footage.
Okay.
Now, we still give value towards basement square footage, finished and unfinished. But value goes towards above grade square footage. So I've never encountered an appraisal or a situation where I don't count square footage in the basement at all. So that's kind of interesting. But I hope that answers your question.
I'm thinking of an appraisal that I saw that was an out of state. So I think it's a percent that sometimes they don't count below grade finishes or square footage. And I do know that in Salt Lake they do, because like every home has a basement. So
maybe it's something with the water table. I don't know.
Cole Parkinson asks what adds value to a home and what does not. But I think you kind of nicely answered that with paint and flooring and things like that.
That's my mom. Hi, Mom.
Oh, cute. You answered it like as she was asking it, so you guys are just on the same wavelength.
Okay. what things that don't add value, a lot of people will say, you know, I replaced every single ceiling fan with these really high energy ceiling fans. I'm like, ceiling fans are kind of just like replacing the light fixture or the, you know, the outlet sockets. It's little things, but
Yeah.
all things add up, but little things like that don't necessarily add up, no matter how expensive they are.
I always say in Salt Lake, the very best thing you could possibly do with a home is add a bathroom.
Yeah,
It seems like my consumers, because there's so many little bungalows with just
sure.
one bathroom, and if you can add a bathroom, and they're usually in the basement anyway, so maybe same answer to the same question. So okay, well, I have 10,000 more questions, but I think that we should probably wrap up. Let me just check this feed and make sure I didn't miss any. There might be some Spanish questions that I don't know. I don't think that they're asking questions. I think they're saying how they know you.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know a little bit. Yeah, no other questions on there.
Great.
So if no one else has questions, you have lots of fans on here, that's for sure. So yeah, if no one else has any questions, then we'll wrap up here. Every once in a while, people will ask questions afterwards because I post this on my feed. Somebody said really good info, thank you. So I'll post this on my feed, and sometimes there's questions in there, and I can just send those to you and answer them.
Great. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
thank you so much for joining. This was fabulous. I'm so happy to have spoken to a real appraiser and to
Yeah,
have a
no problem.
business.
And if you have any other questions, definitely forward them to me. I'm happy to answer. Happy to educate the public because I'm learning every day. So.
I love it. And next time I'll bring donuts.
That's perfect. There you go. There's your suggestion after all.
Exactly. Okay, thanks, Cole, so much. Have a great night.
You too.
Okay, bye.